right? Queen's Wise Words, that would be page 62. Is that it? Okay. So what I think we'll do is we'll start by reading, since it's been such a long time since we've gotten together. I think we will read down through chapter 5 until we get to verse 10, right? Is that when the old queen comes in? Okay, so 12. Okay, actually, I'm going to read down through verse 12, and then we'll pick up where we left off. So chapter 5, Belshazzar's feast. Belshazzar the king made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. And while he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. In the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked against each other. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. The king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and he shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Now all the king's wise men came, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king its interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled. His countenance was changed, and his lords were astonished. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. The queen spoke, saying, "O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change." So I just want to pause here for a minute, and let's just go back over what we went through last time we were together. And just a reminder of what's happening here. So what is happening here is that Persia and the Medes are on the move. They've already taken over many of the cities of Babylon, and the actual king, Nabonidus, had come up from where he was. Remember, he was down in like Arabia, and he was excavating and rebuilding these temples, and with the goal of, I think he enjoyed it, and he was trying to strengthen his kingdom and create unity, and he heard that the Medes and the Persians were on the move, so he goes back up to Babylon, and on his way he stops and he collects all the temple idols from the different temples as he goes. You want to get all the gods involved in this to help. And he brings them back to the capital, which is Babylon, and I don't know where they're meeting, but to wherever they're meeting. And so they've set up all these idols in this room. And in the meantime, I think I have pictures eventually, but I do have pictures we're going to get to see Babylon. But in the meantime, he also brought all of the nobles from all the other cities and stuff with him. So they're all in Babylon, and they have placed their faith in the city of Babylon because they think it's so fortified, and that these false gods they're going to call out to them, and they're going to protect them. And so he, in the meantime, they're close, so he goes out to fight them. Nabonidus does. He ends up being overtaken, and he escapes to, I can't remember the name, Borisip or something. He escapes to another city, and he's taken there. So he's already been captured at this point. I don't know if they realize he's been captured yet, but he's already been captured. So what we have there is we have that him and his wife went back, and they brought all the noble people, and they're all in this one city of Babylon now. And so Belshazzar throws a feast for them, kind of like a, nobody, we're impenetrable. Nobody can take us over. And that's what's going on here. He has this big feast, and I think it's intentional what he did with drinking from the vessels. That's like the last thing. And we remember that his father, Nebuchadnezzar, took these vessels, but who gave these vessels to Nebuchadnezzar? The Lord did. The Lord gave them to him, and he put them in his temple, right? Because that was their mindset, that if you win, your God is stronger. So he has these vessels. Belshazzar goes and he takes them out, and he, desecrates them. He uses them in a blasphemous way. And so that's where we come in on chapter 5. This is what's happening. And we want to remember that the books of Daniel, they kind of have like a comparison. So you have chapter 1, and then you have 2, which goes along with 7. Then you have chapter 3 that goes along with chapter 6. And right now we have chapter 5, but 4 and 5 go together. And what we have in chapters 4 and 5 is we see arrogance. We see 2 arrogant kings. And we know from chapter 4 how God dealt with Nebuchadnezzar's arrogance and how Nebuchadnezzar responded. And now we're going to see his grandson and his arrogance, and how God's going to deal with Belshazzar and his arrogance. So that's where we're going to pick up. So back to verse 10. It says, the queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. The queen spoke, saying, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God. And in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give the interpretation. So Belshazzar's trust was in man. Him and all the other nobles of the kingdom trusted in the city walls. They trusted in the food they had stored up. They had enough food stored up, I think, for like 2 years at least. They trusted in their false gods. They trusted in their army. And what they don't know at this point is that one of their generals, Gabryas, has defected to the other side. And this is what's happening right now. So before we get in, let's just turn to Jeremiah 17, 5 through 6. And we're going to look at how God views Belshazzar. Jeremiah 17. And we're going to look at verses 5 and 6. And this is how God views Belshazzar. And this is what his mother sees as she goes in to see him. And I'll talk a little bit more about her too. So verse 5, it says, Thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his strength, whose heart, right, his soul, his thinking departs from the Lord. For he is like a shrub in the desert and shall not see when good comes, but shall inhabit the parched places in the wilderness, in a salt land which is not inhabited. And this is how God is viewing Belshazzar. And Belshazzar at this point, he is unstable. And what we're going to see is his mom's wise advice. And we'll pick up right now. So we see in verse 10, the queen entered the banquet hall because of the words of the kings and his nobles. The queen spoke and said, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale. And the queen came in to calm the situation and give advice. So what's happening is, the queen is there, but she's not at the party. And we're going to assume this queen is his mother, who came up with the father. And she's not part of this party. We know that he has his wives and his concubines there, but not this queen who comes in. So she's most likely the queen mother. And probably what happened was she hears the roar of the party, right? Oh, lots going on. And then all of a sudden, it goes silent. And so she's probably like, what's happened? right? Have we been taken over? Like, she wants to know what's happened. So she starts walking towards the banquet hall where they're having this huge banquet. And on the way, she must meet some of the guards or the nobles, whatever, and they're telling her what happened. So she goes into her son, and she sees how he's acting, right? How is he acting? His knees are knocking. He is terrified, right? The blood is gone from his face. He's pale. He is frightened. And she goes in and says to him, says, "Oh, king, live forever." But she's, like a mother, she looks at him and she's like, "You're a king. Get yourself together." And so she's kind of rebuking him, but in a nice way. And so this is most likely Nitocris is her name, and that would have been Nabonidus' wife. So let me see what other notes I have here. So she goes in and she rebukes him and says, "Pull yourself together." That is what she is saying. And here's her coming in. I love this picture. Here comes mama. Get yourself together. And because she's his mother, she could probably get away with that. Okay, so A, it's virtually impossible to know the actual identity of this queen. Some speculate she was Belshazzar's mother, the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, which I think that's what it is because that's going to answer some other questions as we go along. Or grandmother, a wife of Nebuchadnezzar. That's less likely. But either way, Daniel referred to her as queen in this passage. And the queen definitely knew Babylon's history and who in the kingdom would be able to interpret the dream. So Daniel 5:11a, it says, "There is a man in your kingdom in whom is a spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him." And so we need to understand and keep in mind that she is speaking in the understanding of their mindset. Like this isn't how we would talk as believers in the church age, but she is speaking to him in a way that he can understand, he can grasp. And so she was referring to Nebuchadnezzar. That would be her father and his grandfather, but there wasn't a word for grandfather in their culture. And so you would just call the grandfather father, meaning like your ancestor. And so if we go back to Daniel 4, 8 and 9, it says, she's basically quoting her, I think it's her father, Nebuchadnezzar, in verse 8. She says, "But at last Daniel came before me. His name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. In him is the spirit of the holy God. And I told the dream before him, saying, Belshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy God is in you, and no secret troubles you. Explain to me the visions of my dream that I have seen and its interpretation." And so it seems like she was present for that. She knew that. And we know from Daniel 1 that God in verse 4, it says, "Young men in whom there was no blemish." Oh, no, that's not it. I'm sorry. Maybe it's chapter 2. No. This is going to be a long, awkward pause on the thing. Well, where it says that God gave him the ability to interpret dreams and stuff also. Oh yeah, 117. "As for these 4 young men, God gave. We always want to look for that. God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams." So that is something that Daniel had been given specifically from God. So we see with this Nitocris is that she has the same confidence in Daniel that her father Nebuchadnezzar had. And we only have 2 accounts really of Daniel solving difficult problems. But when we read these verses, it kind of seems like he has a reputation for it, right? If you have a problem, go see Daniel. Daniel will know how to answer that. And so, oh yeah, it's right here in my notes, Daniel 1:17. Look at your notes. Okay, so because God had given him that he had a reputation for being able to solve issues. And the queen has her confidence in him, just like her father did. So she knows something about him. Okay, so the queen, of course, spoke of Daniel and how he had interpreted King Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, which we see in Daniel 4:18. So she knew who Daniel was, and she knew he could help. And guess what else? She knew where to find him, which I find very interesting. Because the way that we're going to see that this Belshazzar talks about him, it's like he doesn't even know who Daniel is. But the queen does, and she knows exactly where to find him. And where has Daniel gone? Either is he? He's probably about in his 80s at this point. He is in his 80s at this point, and he's not serving with these other wise men because he doesn't come when they're called. So he's either retired, or I think the next kings that followed Nebuchadnezzar didn't like Daniel. They didn't like that he was a Jew. They didn't like that he was in control of everything. And I think they kind of just left him aside and went back to their false gods. Okay, so we have a few accounts of Daniel's insight and wisdom being shared again. So this is probably, common practice for Daniel. So the queen knows. Remember, she's been gone for some time because Belshazzar is ruling in Babylon. Okay, B, so just as Nebuchadnezzar had done, she referred to Daniel in a way pagan people could understand, saying he had a spirit of the holy gods. 5:11b. So in King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and diviners. She reminded Belshazzar that since Daniel had once managed all the wise men of Babylon, he was qualified to intervene. So Nebuchadnezzar was a king. She keeps pointing him out, right? How many times does she say your father? This was your father. So he was a king, and he was the standard for all kings to live up to, right? Because he was just like the head of gold. He was the all-powerful king. And Belshazzar is not a king like his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar was. Nebuchadnezzar was he was a conqueror, and he had made Babylon a world power. And we know that the Most High God was the one who gave Israel into Nebuchadnezzar's hands. Nebuchadnezzar had enough sense to see a difference in Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. Right? He noticed that right from the get-go. These boys are different. They're not only different from all the other boys we've brought over, but they're different from even all the wise men in my own kingdom now. And remember, he said they're 10 times wiser, meaning it's not even a close contest. There's something different about these boys. And Belshazzar probably knew of Daniel, is my guess. He probably knew of Daniel and may have even known him as a child. My thought is this kid is in the kingdom as a kid, and he watched all that happened with Nebuchadnezzar. He knew what kind of a ruler his grandfather was, and I think he knew of Daniel. I don't know how you wouldn't have known of Daniel, but, he probably had some sense of knowing him as a child. And he definitely knew the proclamation, the huge gospel tract that his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar had sent out. Remember that in chapter 4, after he humbles himself? He sends it out to the whole known world of that time, which would have been the Empire of Babylon. And so everyone would have received the gospel message. And I certainly think Belshazzar knew this. But he's made a choice, and so is his father. All right, and we remember his father, Nabonidus, was a great general. Do you remember that story? Where he kind of made a peace treaty, so he kind of had a name for himself. Remember that story? Okay, so she told him that his father, an enduring way of referring to the most important predecessor, right? She doesn't go to his actual father. She goes back right up to Nebuchadnezzar. So King Nebuchadnezzar had made Daniel chief over the sorcerers, enchanters, astrologers, and fortune tellers of Babylon. So she's saying the most powerful king you've ever known in your life and we've seen thus far, he trusted this man Daniel, and he not only trusted him so much, he made him chief, right? So Daniel kind of already was like the second in command or whatever. He was chief over all these wise men that, remember, they're not just Like we would look at him now probably, like you see in like the modern day movies, and these type of people are like in the basement, but the king's still going to get information from him. That's not how it was here. These guys were like all throughout the kingdom, and they were politicians too. So they had positions of power and authority within the kingdom. And so Nebuchadnezzar trusted this Daniel so much that he made him over the chief of all these people throughout the kingdom. So thousands we're talking about. Okay, so she speaks to him in a motherly way. She keeps pointing out that Nebuchadnezzar, his predecessor, was a great and mighty king to be imitated, and that he trusted and appointed Daniel because of because of God's favor upon him. Like Nebuchadnezzar recognized that, and Nebuchadnezzar was the type of man that would even acknowledge that. Like he probably wasn't giving credit to Daniel, and we know Daniel wasn't taking credit, but saying, your God has given you wisdom and insight. So Nebuchadnezzar was a religious or spiritually in tuned man. And so this is what she points out to him. So B, this historical fact concerning Daniel's position of superiority had very likely made him unpopular, right? You speak truth, people don't like you. Since he would have opposed the pagan worldview and practices of these religious sects. And remember, there's a lot of religious sects because there's a lot of different pagan idols. And I do have, if we get to it, a picture of just inside Babylon and the different pagan temples. So someone between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar must have removed Daniel from office. Daniel 5:12. And then we'll read on more. Okay. This was because an extraordinary spirit, knowledge and insight, interpretation of dreams, exclamation of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar, right? She's making a relation. Maybe you didn't hear of him as Daniel, but you probably heard of him as Belteshazzar, his Babylonian name. So let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation. And it always interests me. Remember, we're still in the Aramaic section of Daniel until we get through chapter 7, is that they'll say his name is Belteshazzar, but they always call him Daniel. So I want to know why. Like, why wouldn't they keep calling him by the name they gave him? Because they did with Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, right? They kept calling him Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But with Daniel, they don't do that. And I don't know why. So, right, and I have that. It's interesting that the Queen Mother uses his Hebrew name and then backs it up with his Babylonian name, right? Okay, you don't remember Daniel? How about Belteshazzar? So the queen reveals her knowledge in Babylonian history and the affairs of the kingdom with her words. She knew and had probably read Nebuchadnezzar's proclamation in Daniel 4:34. So let's just look over at that and look at that. And at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me. And I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. And I can imagine after his humbling, he probably became a different husband, right? And I'm sure that his daughter, if this is his daughter, recognized that and experienced that and saw that. And I tend to think this woman probably got saved too. That's my guess, but we'll find out someday, right? Okay, A, after a lengthy discourse on Daniel's qualifications, the queen urged Belshazzar to summon him. B, it is interesting that she used Daniel's Hebrew name, not his Babylonian name. She may have believed in God like King Nebuchadnezzar did. And C, the queen was confident in Daniel's ability to interpret the writing, right? She didn't say he might be or maybe or let's try this. She was like, you need answers to this? Here's your man. Okay, so let's read 13. Let's just read, well, I guess it's right there. So Daniel 5:13. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel who is one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? So Belshazzar listened to the queen's advice and summoned Daniel. But we see in this verse his contempt for Daniel. That's what we're reading here. He's pointing out, like, you're just a captive, that my father. So here his mother comes in and says, Nebuchadnezzar, your grandfather, was the king of kings. He's the one you want to have a standard to live up to and imitate how he behaved and how he ran a kingdom. And then we see Belshazzar just kind of, aren't you one of the slaves, the captives my grandfather brought over? And what he's doing is he's elevating himself above Daniel by stating their history, right? And don't we have to do that when we put people down to put ourselves above them? And this is what he's doing here. So let's read let's read just 14 through 16 in our Bibles, and then we'll go back to the script here. So it says 14, I have heard of you, that the Spirit of God is in you, and that the light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not give the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of you, that you can give interpretations and explain enigmas. Now if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple, and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Okay, so let's move on with this now. A, Belshazzar knew more about Daniel than he cared to admit. This information about Daniel being a Jewish deportee did not come from the queen, right? She didn't say that. She didn't mention where he came or originated from. And B, Belshazzar may have been trying to intimidate Daniel since he mentioned his Jewish nationality twice, reminding everyone in earshot that Daniel had been brought as a captive from Judah. So we want to remember what's going on. He's having this big banquet in this banquet hall, and then the writing on the wall happens. And most likely where he is in this banquet is probably the best lit place in the whole room. And he's probably elevated, and he's, you always have like your most important people near you. So the whole room is full of nobility from all over the kingdom, and I think everybody's probably still being pretty quiet, because that's a pretty crazy thing to happen, that a hand appears and writes on the wall. And to boot, they can't understand what the writing means. And so they don't know what's going on, but they're aware of what's going on with Persia and the Medes. They are aware that they're camped outside. Can you imagine that? The audacity to have a big party when your enemy is camped outside. It just goes to show their arrogance. And so they're aware of all this, and that happens, and they don't know what it says. So Belshazzar, he's in his arrogance, he's putting Daniel down and elevating himself. So see, despite his terror from the handwriting on the wall, remember he goes from like knocking his knees together and stuff, Belshazzar, he took the opportunity to belittle Daniel, proclaiming that he was one of the exiles from Judah. He did this while he insulted God, blatantly using the gold vessels from the temples at his drinking party. And this just reveals how blinding Belshazzar's pride was. And so let's look at Psalm 33, verse 12 really quickly. And we're going to just see about pride, and just see how, it's like questionable, like, if you're in this sort of situation where your enemies surrounded you and things are happening, like a normal person would probably start praying, even if it was to one of his false gods, but this is not what this man does. All right, verse 12, it says, okay, that's not the right thing. Okay, it says, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he has chosen as his own inheritance. And if Belshazzar had ruled as Nebuchadnezzar did, being sensitive to spiritual things. Now, Belshazzar didn't get saved. Nebuchadnezzar didn't get saved to the end of his life, but he wasn't arrogant, and he was sensitive to the spiritual things. He was searching, he was seeking, and he didn't belittle Daniel when Daniel came at him with truth. He listened to what Daniel had to say about his God because he was curious and interested, and he took the time to really observe and notice something different about these boys, and he attributed it to their God. And had Belshazzar ruled like that, blessed would their nation be, right? Isn't that a nation who puts God first is a nation that is blessed? And remember, was it here in the conference we learned like blessed? When man is blessed, it means God is giving something towards man. It's something from him, right? When God is blessed, we bless him. It means we're acknowledging that he is the Most High and worthy of worship. When he blesses us, it means he is extending, he is giving something to us. And that happens personally and at a national level. And this is not the attitude that Belshazzar is having. And so he's going to suffer the consequence, we'll see. So the fact that Belshazzar had never personally met Daniel highlights the probability that Daniel was no longer in place of authority in Babylon. I'm not sure that's true. So I put that verse up there. Yeah, okay. All right, 5:14. It says, "Now I've heard about you that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom have been found in you." The king recounted the queen's words, describing Daniel's unparalleled wisdom. So he's kind of just parroting whatever the queen said. Whoops. Did you guys get that? Yeah. Okay. Daniel 5:15. "Just now the wise men and the conjurers were brought in before me that they may read this inscription and make its interpretation known to me. But they could not declare the interpretation of the message." The king's statements graphically expose the bankruptcy of human wisdom. And so if we go through the books of Daniel that we've been through so far, this is the third time the wise men have been brought in for answers and they have been unable to do their job. Right? Remember we went through what each of these sects of wise men is, and literally they should have known how to do this because this is the job they're getting paid to do. And they can't do it. This is their third strike. And so the crisis in chapter 5, it illustrates the instability, the insecurity, and the impotence of the kingdom of man. It's the bankruptcy of human viewpoint. And that's why your dad can't get questions from her, because she only has human viewpoint. So she doesn't even have the ability to answer him properly. So Daniel 5:16a, he says, "But I personally have heard about you, that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems." Well, yeah, your mother just told you about him, so you have personally heard about her. He probably knew, though. It's my guess, but we'll have to ask Queen Mother someday. All right, so A, it sounds like Belshazzar had personally heard of Daniel before this event, right? Because he brings in details that the Queen Mother didn't give him. And B, although Belshazzar had previously heard about Daniel's supernatural ability to interpret dreams and explain riddles, he did not call for him until after the queen suggested he do so. He probably knew he wasn't going to hear what he wanted to hear. Okay, Daniel 5:16b. "Now, if you are able," we see the doubt there, "if you can do it, able to read the inscription and make its interpretation known to me." So Belshazzar was not convinced at this point that Daniel could indeed read and interpret the inscription. He challenged Daniel to prove his reputation. In Daniel 5:16c, it says, "Now if you are able, you will be clothed with purple and wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you will have authority as the third ruler in the kingdom." So he offered Daniel the same reward he had offered the other wise men, including being named the third highest ruler in the kingdom of Babylon. So let's read this, then we're going to go back to the scripture. Okay, so A, the fact that he offered Daniel to be the third ruler in the kingdom is strong proof that Belshazzar was actually second in command under his absent imperial father. And we know from the Nabonidus Chronicles and stuff that have been unearthed that that is true. Okay, so let's see. So B, this was an amazing offer. In the case of the untimely deaths of Belshazzar and his father, Nabonidus, this third ruler in the kingdom would immediately become king. And it was not uncommon for Persian kings to allow conquered leaders to remain in positions of authority. And this may account for why Daniel quickly became prominent in the Persian government. And so when we get into Persia next time, we'll talk a little bit more about Cyrus's mindset and stuff and his belief system. Okay, so this is going to bring us to the fall of Babylon. And so let's do a quick review of the chronology of the life of Daniel. And so we see that the years of Daniel's ministry, remember he was taken in 605 BC, and the last book we're going to see, or last part of his book, is ends in 535. And so he's taken captive in 605. At the time, Jehoiakim was king, and then the puppet king Zedekiah got put in. And remember, that comes right after just off of Josiah died. The godly king died, so Daniel was raised in a godly kingdom, and then Jehoiakim comes and Zedekiah. So then they quickly go back to their pagan gods, and that's when Nebuchadnezzar comes and Babylon comes and takes them captive. And so we see Nebuchadnezzar's rule. In 602 is when Daniel's training is finished, the 3 years of training, and he gets interviewed by Nebuchadnezzar, and he gets appointed as a wise man and then as the chief of the wise men, right, when he interprets the dream. 586, so in between 602 and 586, we have a second deportation. I believe it's 597, and that is when more captives are taken. That's when Ezekiel gets taken over into the Babylonian kingdom. But next time I plan to have some outlines and stuff for you guys so you can look at it better, because it takes time for this stuff to kind of like really solidify. And so I have some stuff for you. I just didn't want to hand them out this time. Okay, so the temple is destroyed. This is the third time Nebuchadnezzar goes over to Jerusalem and destroys it. And that's when the temple is destroyed. And we'll talk more about that too. Well, remember that's when I think it's Zedekiah is rebelling against Nebuchadnezzar and making an uprising. Remember we read in Jeremiah, where Jeremiah, so they're all pro-Egypt and he's pro-Babylon. And Jeremiah is the only one who is we're not going to be freed in this way from Babylon. So, build your houses, settle your families here, get used to it, because we're in for the long haul. And that's when he goes over and destroys it. But he also, at some time in between here, we have Daniel 3, where he tries to unite the kingdom with the music and the statue. And then Daniel 4 is when Nebuchadnezzar is humbled. I think he became a believer at this time. He sends out the whole gospel tract to the whole kingdom of Babylonia. And then that brings us to here, where we're at right now. And then I want to say that, hold on. We're going to see so you see how there's a big gap there? I'm just going to tell you this now before we go on. So what's going to happen is we're going to do chapter 6, hopefully in the next get that done in maybe 2 sessions. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back, and chapters 7 and 8 actually happen in that gap right there. So we'll go back and we're going to see, and I tell you this because Daniel has some more insight. Remember from chapter 2 when Nebuchadnezzar is revealed the statue? Well, God reveals some more insight to Daniel. So as the Persians and the Medes are coming, it's not taking Daniel by surprise. God has already given him more insight, and he knows what's about to go down. Okay, so that's our review. So let's read 17. Let's just read 17, and I'll stop when I stop. How about that? Okay. So in verse 17, now we're going to see Daniel's rebuke of King Belshazzar. And I love this. This is one of my favorite parts of this chapter because we see the other one is the mother, Queen Mother, coming in and like, get yourself together. Boy, what is wrong with you? You're supposed to be a king. But now we have the king Belshazzar has offered Daniel all this stuff. I will clothe you with a purple robe. I will put a gold of chain. And that gold of chain was very significant in that culture because if you wore that and people saw it, they'd know you were a man of importance, of prominence. And the purple, obviously, that's the color of royalty. And then he'd be third ruler. So this is what Belshazzar answers Daniel. And in 17, then Daniel answered and said before the king, keep your gifts, right? Let your gifts be for yourself. And I want you to notice that Daniel is not answering Belshazzar in a respectful way. He's kind of given it right back to him. And it shows that Daniel also has contempt for this man. So he says, let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another, right? I'm not interested in that. Yet, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. So he refuses the gifts, but he does agree to interpret it, but he doesn't start with just interpreting it. He goes, O king. He's going to kind of give him the gospel first. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty, glory, and honor. Where did Nebuchadnezzar get it from? The Most High God. And because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up, and whomever he wished, he put down. And when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was disposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. Let's stop there, and we'll go on with our slides here. So Daniel 5:17 through 24, it's Daniel's stinging rebuke of King Belshazzar. So we saw here Daniel 5:17. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, keep your gifts for yourselves, or give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription to the king and make the interpretation known to him. Daniel bluntly refused any compensation. He would not let economic benefits motivate or cloud his interpretation of the message, right? Daniel was a man who could not be purchased. And he speaks to Belshazzar with disdain. And we see, if we go back, he always spoke to Nebuchadnezzar with grace and respect. But he doesn't even address him as king at first, right? Generally, like even his mother, when he came in, said, "O king," he does not do that. He just goes right into the, keep it for yourself, little man. I added those words. And so here we go. He's rebuking Belshazzar. And I love that handwriting. It's like glowing. I'm like, God would do that, right? The first neon lights. So I don't know. That's just an artist rendition, but. All right. So in verse 18, Daniel 5:18, it says, O king, the Most High God granted sovereignty. He granted grandeur. He granted glory, and he granted majesty to Nebuchadnezzar, your father or your ancestor. As the first order of business, Daniel clarified the fact that God, not man, had given King Nebuchadnezzar his splendor and royal authority. So now, Daniel now answers him with respect. But instead of just telling Belshazzar, the Persian army is coming, right? They're actually camped out, and they're actually probably, and they're attempting to enter right now. He could have told him that, but he doesn't. And he addresses his spiritual issue first. And I love that. He has a care for Belshazzar. He's going to address the spiritual issue of what's going on. And let's just look back at Daniel 2, verse 37. And we're going to see this word yihav, and it means to give. So in Daniel 2, 37, and then we're going to go back to 23. It says, Daniel 2:37. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given a kingdom, power, strength, and glory is given to you. And then go back to 23, and it says, I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have Yahweh wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand. And so we see it used here in two different ways, one to Daniel and one to King Nebuchadnezzar. And the Most High God gave all this to your father. This is what he's saying to Belshazzar. This is what the Most High God has given to your father, your grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar. What do you have? What do you actually have? You know, like you're all huddled up, all the nobles of your kingdom are huddled up in this building. You're drinking your cares away, worshiping these false idols, and the enemy is encamped right outside. What do you have? What stability do you have? What do you have that the Most High God has given you? And then I put Psalm 97 here. It says, 97:9, it says, for you, Lord, are most high above all the earth. You are exalted far above all gods. And this is Daniel's mindset coming in to tell Belshazzar, like, you've refused to give glory to the Most High God. And he's above all these gods that you're worshiping. Because we're gonna see in a minute what he says about these false gods. So 5:19a, Daniel 5:19a, it says, because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled before him. And Daniel reminded Belshazzar from whom Nebuchadnezzar had gotten his authority. It was from the Most High God. And peoples, nations feared and trembled before him because of what the Most High God gave him. And he says, and you, right, he's pointing out, and you are trembling before a hand and writing on the wall. So he keeps making a distinction, like Nebuchadnezzar, because of the Most High God, everybody, including animals, trembled before him. But you are the one who's trembling here. And in 4, Daniel 5:19b says, Nebuchadnezzar killed those he wanted to kill and spared those he wanted to spare. He also honored those he wanted to honor and disgraced those he wanted to humble. And God gave him amazing authority and power. And so he's saying, this is what Nebuchadnezzar could do. What can you do, Belshazzar? You have nothing. Daniel 5:20. But when Nebuchadnezzar claimed personal authorship for his God-given magnificence, God profoundly abased him. Right? When he elevated himself above all these, or really he was calling himself a god, and he says, look what I have done. That's when God knocked him down. The Most High God knocked him down. But his heart was lifted and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly. He was taken or disposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him. I think Belshazzar watched this. I think he knew this happened. And so Daniel is telling him, like, what? God gave him all this authority where everything trembled before him. And as soon as his pride hit that peak, God put him right down to nothing. He was like an animal in the fields. And he's reminding Belshazzar of this. So A, God rules, not man. When a world leader acts arrogantly, God maintains the power. God reserves the right to send judgment and remove any leader from office. And so let's just look at a few verses. Let's go back to the book of Psalm, and we'll start in Psalm 22. And we'll look at verse 28 in Psalm 22. And I was going to do slides of these, but I really couldn't. This however they formatted this slideshow wouldn't allow me to do it. Okay, so Psalm 22:28 says, for the kingdom is the Lord's, and he rules over the nations. Who rules over the nations? And this is something we need to get in our thinking now. We don't have to fear who's in control of wherever they're in control of. Because God is the one who raises up, and God is the one who pulls down, and he rules over the nations. Now go ahead to Psalm 47. And we're going to look at verse 8. And so 47:8 says, God reigns over the nations. God sits on his holy throne. Right? We're going to watch nations rise up. We're going to watch nations fall down. But what we need to remember is that God is sitting on his holy throne, and he is set apart. He is not like any other ruler, and his throne will never fall, never fail. So go back to Psalm 46:10. And this is what God says. He says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." And that's a promise God has made to us. That is going to happen at a full level, complete level at one day. And then just go ahead to Romans chapter 13. And we'll look at a New Testament verse. So Romans 13:1. It says, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God." And we need to remember that. And we need to remember when Romans was being written, what was going on in Jerusalem and all them. Like, they were being persecuted heavily. And he's reminding them, be subject to your governing authorities, because there is no authority except from God. And the authorities that exist, they're appointed by God. So keep your eyes on him. Keep that eternal perspective and know that God is in control, and he is the author of history. He is moving history, and things happen because he is allowing them, and he's the one who is he's guiding and directing history, and things don't happen outside of God's will. And that's what we need to remember, and that's what we see happening here, is that, do you remember where he said in Jeremiah, "You'll be captive in Babylon 70 years. And guess what we're at? We're about at the 70-year point. And so Babylon's about to fall. God gave Babylon so much time to be in control. And, he knew that Nebuchadnezzar, what his destiny was, but he also knew what the kings following him were going to be like. And so it's time. It's time for another world power to come into office. And we're going to see when we get to 7 and 8 that Daniel didn't quite understand this. But he does by this time. Okay, so B, Daniel reminded Belshazzar that God humbled Nebuchadnezzar. The memory of seeing his grandfather eating grass like an animal may have been etched into Belshazzar's soul. And maybe that's what made him, a child's mind trying to wrap around what he's seeing. Maybe that's what played into his mindset. Who knows, but he did probably remember that. C, Daniel focused on Nebuchadnezzar's pride. He probably didn't know that. I mean, Belshazzar put out a whole thing. Even if they had kept it hidden for those 7 years, he put out a proclamation about what had happened. So I'm sure that was, this probably was framed and put somewhere as a reminder. Okay, C, Daniel focused on Nebuchadnezzar's pride. It was his pride that let God's abasement of Nebuchadnezzar. And this same arrogance was leading Belshazzar to an untimely death. And Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." And the fact that Daniel has taken the time to point this out to Belshazzar shows God's grace. Belshazzar is still alive at this point. There's still hope for him at this point. Okay, so... Yeah, we read through 22. Okay, so 521a, he was also driven away from mankind, and his heart, right, his thinking, who he was in his deepest resources of his soul, was made like that of beasts. And his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. He was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven. And this reminded proud Belshazzar of Nebuchadnezzar's failure in judgment. So he was all these things that God gave him. But then when he took credit for it and didn't give credit to the Most High, when he became so arrogant, God slammed him right down. And that's what he's communicating. And so we have to fill in the gaps that Belshazzar had understanding of this. He knew this. And Daniel 5:21b says, God left this heavy judgment over Nebuchadnezzar until he recognized that the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes. So sadly, Belshazzar was not being offered a second chance or an opportunity to learn from his mistakes. Instead, he was about to hear that he had already been judged. But this does not mean that he couldn't have turned to the Most High God. Judgment was set, right? And that's just like with us. Sometimes we make choices that we have to suffer through the consequences. That's already been meted out for us. But it doesn't mean through those consequences that we can't turn to the Most High God, right? God is always available, and it wasn't his will for Belshazzar to die lost. So 5:22, let's read through 22 and through 25. Okay. But you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. And you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know. And the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the inscription that was written: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of each word. All right, let's just read down through 29. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. So Belshazzar in 5:22 deliberately and knowingly defied God. Yet you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. Belshazzar's profane use of the holy vessels from God's temple in drunken revelry that very night was red-handed proof of his proud defiance of God. So Belshazzar had no excuse. He already knew all of this. And I love when Daniel says that. You knew all this. Right? He knew all this already. And Romans 1:18 says, For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth and unrighteousness. And I think this was Belshazzar's issue. He was suppressing that truth and unrighteousness. He was arrogant. He didn't want to be told. He didn't want to know truth. And not only that, he was just deliberately defiant against the Most High God. I think it was all premeditated. They had all those idols, and I think he was like, I'm going to take out Israel's God, you know, the things from the temple, and I'm going to blaspheme the God of Israel. Daniel 5:23. Daniel proceeded to pronounce a four-part indictment against Belshazzar. Daniel 5:23 says, You defied Almighty God, but you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven. Right? That's one thing you've done. 5:23b says, You led your people to profane the vessels devoted to the worship of God. And they have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines have been drinking wine from them. In Daniel 5:23, you foolishly worshipped lifeless images, right? And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see, hear, or understand. And Daniel, he's using sarcasm here to drive home his point of the stupidity of worshiping these images, these false gods, right? There's no life in them, yet you're worshiping them. In 5:23d, you have not given glory to the God who gave you your life and breath, but the God in whose hand are your life, breath, and all your ways you have not glorified. And I love how he does that. He starts out and he just kind of funnels it right to the heart issue that Belshazzar is dealing with. And at any moment, Belshazzar could have humbled himself, and he chose not to. So he doesn't give Belshazzar the respect as a king that he showed Nebuchadnezzar, but he points out the stupidity of idol worship and drives home the creator-creation distinction. He's giving the gospel of the Creator who can save. And glorified, this word glorified is the word hadar, and it means to honor. You have not honored the one who actually holds your life in his hands. But you're honoring all these things that don't breathe, they don't see, they don't make decisions, they don't do anything except sit where you placed them when you brought them in here and collect dust. So truth. A supreme God alone is worthy of worship. So we're going to take the time to look at these verses. So I couldn't get them on the slides again. So let's look at Isaiah 44. And we'll look at 6 through 8. And it says, a supreme God alone is worthy of worship. All authority originates from God. So let's just see this. Isaiah 44, verses 6 through 8. Do not fear, nor be afraid. Have I not told you from that time and declared it? You are my witnesses. Is there a God besides me? Indeed, there is no other rock. I know not one. Those who make an image of all of them are useless, and their precious things shall not profit. They are their own witnesses. They neither see nor know, that they may be ashamed. And you can go on. So let's just turn to Jeremiah 27. Just go ahead a book. In Jeremiah 27, and we're going to read verses 5 through 7.
Isaiah 44, 6 through 8 is something different.
Oh, let me see. Oh, 6 through 8. I'm sorry. I read 8 and 9. Okay, let's do that again. 6 through 8. Thus says the Lord, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, I am the first, and I am the last. Besides me, there is no God. And who can proclaim as I do? Then let him declare it and set it in order before me, since I appointed the ancient people. And the things that are coming and shall come, let them show these to them. Do not fear nor be afraid. Have I not told you from that time and declared it? You are my witnesses. There is a God. Is there a God besides me? Indeed, there is no other rock. I know not one. Thank you. So, and that's something Daniel would have, a verse he would have been very familiar with. Okay, so Jeremiah 27, we'll look at 5 through 7. I have made the earth, the man and the beast that are on the ground, by my great power and by my outstretched arm, and have given it to whom it seemed proper to me. And now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and the beasts of the field I have also given him to serve him. So all nations shall serve him, and his son, and his son's son, until the time of this land comes. And then many nations and great kings shall make him serve them. So this is his son's son, where we're at. Okay, go ahead to Hebrews now, and we'll look at Hebrews 1:3, and then we'll look at Colossians. So Hebrews 1:3 says, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had himself purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. And that's where our Savior is today. So just go back a couple books to Colossians chapter 1, and we'll look at 16 and 17. Okay, 16, 17. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. And let's go to the next slide. So that was the truth. Lie. Men are capable of creating living gods worthy of worship. So let's go back to Jeremiah 10. And he says, kings gain authority by their own doing. So we're going to see a contrast here. So go back to Jeremiah 10. And we'll read. We're just going to read 1 through, okay, let's just read it. Ready? 1 through 5. He says, so remember, Jeremiah is like a contemporary, so it's good to see what's going on in this book. Hear the word which the Lord speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus says the Lord, do not learn the way of the Gentiles. Do not be dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the Gentiles are dismayed at them. For the customs of the peoples are futile. For one cuts a tree from the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers so that it will not topple. They are upright like a palm tree, and they cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot go by themselves. Do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, nor can they do any good. Right? These false gods can't even move by themselves. And then 6 through 25, he says, inasmuch as there is none like you, O Lord, you are great, and your name is great and mighty. Who would not fear you, O King of the nations? For this is your rightful due. For among all the wise men of the nations and in all their kingdoms, there is none like you. But they are altogether dull-hearted and foolish. A wooden idol is a worthless doctrine. Silver is beaten into plates. It is brought from Tarshish, and gold from Uphaz, the work of the craftsman and the hands of the metalsmith. Blue and purple are their clothing. They are all the work of skillful men. But the Lord is the true God. He is the living God, the everlasting King. At his wrath the earth will tremble, and the nations will not be able to endure his indignation. Thus you shall say to him, the gods that have not made the heavens and the earth shall perish from the earth and from under these heavens. He has made the earth by his power, and he has established the world by his wisdom, and has stretched out the heavens at his discretion. When he utters his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens, and he causes the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He makes lightning for the rain and brings the wind out of his treasures. Everyone is dull-hearted without knowledge. Every metalsmith is put to shame by an image, for his molded image is falsehood, and there is no breath in them. They are futile, a work of errors. In the time of their punishment they shall perish. The portion of Jacob is not like them, for he is the maker of all things, and Israel is the tribe of his inheritance. The Lord of hosts is his name. Gather up your wares from the land, O inhabitant of the fortress. For thus says the Lord, behold, I will throw out at this time the inhabitants of the land, and will distress them, that they may find it so. Woe is me for my hurt. My wound is severe, but I say truly, this is an infirmity, and I must bear it. My tent is plundered, and all my cords are broken. My children have gone from me, and they are no more. There is no one to pitch up my tent anymore, or set up my curtains. For the shepherds have become dull-hearted and have not sought the Lord. Therefore they shall not prosper, and all their flocks shall be scattered. Behold, the noise of the report has come, and a great commotion out of the north country, to make the cities of Judah desolate, a den of jackals. O Lord, I know the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man who walks to direct his own steps. O Lord, correct me, but with justice, not in your anger, lest you bring me to nothing. Pour out your fury on the Gentiles who do not know you, and on the families who do not call on your name. For they have eaten up Jacob, devoured him and consumed him, and made his dwelling place desolate. And so this is exactly what we see here. That is the truth and the lie of who is directing history and who is worthy of praise. And Belshazzar is not giving God his rightful place. So Daniel 10, I guess we can go back to Daniel. Daniel 10, 5:24. I'm sorry. Point 10, Daniel 5:24. Then the hand was sent from him, and this inscription was written out. Belshazzar's misuse of the temple vessels was the catalyst behind the message on the wall, right? God let him go so far, and then boom. Whoops. Sorry. Okay, so questions that I have about this. Whose hand is this? It's not God's hand, right? God sent a hand. So whose hand is this? And whose ever hand this was, this is how God chose to communicate his message to Belshazzar. He used just a hand. Was it an angel's hand? I don't know. A hand God just materialized? I don't know. But he sent this hand to give Belshazzar a message. An A. What was the big difference between the pride of Nebuchadnezzar and the pride of Belshazzar? Well, Belshazzar openly challenged God, whereas Nebuchadnezzar did not directly challenge him. God met Belshazzar's challenge head on. Let's see this. So B, only after giving Belshazzar a lengthy rebuke in front of all the guests and officials at the party was Daniel ready to interpret the handwriting on the wall. So Daniel points out all Belshazzar has done wrong, right? He's given him a mirror to show him all that he's done wrong. He drives home that creator-creation distinction. This is what you're doing to your creator. You're just a creature. And he shows him the spiritual issue all before he explains the message. So at any point, Belshazzar can humble himself and say, you know what? You're right. So he's giving Belshazzar an opportunity to see his failure and to humble himself. Okay. Huddy, we're ready for the next group of slides. Not sure what that's up for. We might make it. Looks prettier on my end. Okay, so here's a picture again of Daniel rebuking Belshazzar and explaining, finally getting, I like this one of, like, he's finally getting to what his issue, because it's like, remember in the first one, he's like getting ready to tell Belshazzar, and at the end, Belshazzar's kind of like, oh man, that is me, but doesn't humble himself. Okay, so Daniel 5:25 through 31. Let me see. So, okay. Daniel interpreted the message on the wall. So Daniel 5:25, it says, now this is the inscription that was written out. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. It's written in Aramaic. The translation is numbered, weighed, and divided. Excuse me. Even though written in the language of the Chaldeans, these Aramaic words were not understood by the wise men of Babylon. They could not understand their significance. There's a couple theories behind that. We're not going to go too deep into them, but one theory that I think kind of makes sense is that it's, in our culture, we go from left to right when we read. Other cultures, they go from right to left when they read. But something that could have been was that there was no vowels in this, so all they were seeing was the MN, MN, TKL, and then it could have been that it was going like this, from left to right and up. Whatever reason they couldn't understand it, or they just didn't understand what it meant, but it seems like they couldn't read it either. So, okay, so we're going to go into these words a little bit. So, mene, look back at Daniel 1:5 with me, because we want to see that Daniel is so smart. He's kind of making a play on words, and he's kind of making a comparison, sort of, in at least within the book. So, Daniel 1:5 and 1:10. So, 1:5 it says, and we're gonna see this word now. It's the Hebrew word of mene. It's manah, M-A-N-A-H, and it means to appoint. And we're gonna see this in contrast with the word Nathan, which means to give, and that's of God giving on of His authority, or on His authority. So let's look at Daniel 1:5 first. It says, and the king appointed. See, that's our word manah. He appointed them a daily provision of the king's delicacies. And then you go down to verse 10, it says, and the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed, he has manah, he has appointed this. And remember, mene, mene means numbered or to appoint. So it's a play on this word. So you have in contrast of God giving on his authority and the king and rulers appointing things on their authority. So go ahead with me now to verse Daniel 2, and we're going to see this Aramaic word mena again. So verse 2 and verse 24. I'm doing this just so I can really confuse you guys before we leave. Okay, so verse 24. It says this, therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed. So now we have the Aramaic word. It's a form of this mene. And then go forward to verse 49 in the same chapter. And it says, also Daniel petitioned the king, and he set, so that means appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province. So we see here the king appointing. And now mene, so every time we see this word mene, M-E-N-E, it's always of like a king or somebody under the king's authority appointing something. And now we see the handwriting on the wall where it's used of God. And it means he has appointed or he has measured. And so we see kind of this contrast of we go through the scriptures and it's the king is appointed, the king is appointed, the king is appointed. And now God puts it on like the king is now appointing. He's numbered your time, your days. So move on to Daniel 5, 26 through 28. This is the interpretation of the message. So Daniel gave the meaning of the words one by one. And let's see. Okay. So Daniel 5:26, mene. God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. So mene means to number. And the countdown was on. The word number, mene, was repeated twice. Mene, mene. So this may have emphasized the immediacy of the judgment poised to fall on this seemingly invincible kingdom. So remember, too, we want to remember that once we get to 7 and 8, we're going to see that Daniel had other insight that had already happened at this point. So let's look at Genesis 41:32. And then we'll move on. And we're just going to see an example of something happening twice. And it says, and the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by God and God will shortly bring it to pass. And so we see a similarity there with the Pharaoh, that he had this dream twice because it meant that it was coming quickly. And God had appointed it. So here we go. There he is again. And that's what it would have looked like, possibly. See how there's no vowels there? So, that does not look like Aramaic to me, but I don't know. Maybe it is. I should have looked that up. Maybe it is, yeah. Okay, so next word, Daniel 5:27, tekel. You have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. So tekel means to weigh. And God evaluated the Babylonian Empire under Belshazzar's leadership, and using his holy standards, he found it totally unworthy of continued existence. And then 5:28 says, Peres, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. Peres means to divide. And God divided the Babylonian Empire to the Medes, between the Medes and Persians. And so I put this up here. It's the mene, tekel, Peres. So we see here, we read in our scriptures, it said upharsin, right? Upharsin, yeah. And that is plural. That's the plural word of this word, Peres. And the U on upharsin, I wish I could have put that up there. So you see in your scriptures, so if you go back to the verse and you see it, the U, that U there is actually a conjunction. It has the meaning of like and. So Daniel, he tells Belshazzar that it's a dual empire with emphasis on Persia, not the Medes. And so that word Peres, it's like a play on the word Persia too. So it's kind of like dual. Remember, Daniel already knows all this stuff, so he's able to look at it and go, oh yeah, it's plural. So, he knows that at this point, like the Persians and Medes are we'll get into what they're doing, but they're close to entering the building. So Daniel knew it was going to be given to the Medes and Persians, right, because of his dreams, the visions, chapters 2, 7, and 8. So God had told Daniel what the next kingdom will be, and he knows that the Greeks are coming next. He even knows to that. And so that's kind of what those words mean. And we'll move on. Okay, so Daniel 5:29. Then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a necklace of gold around his neck and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as a ruler in the kingdom. Amazingly, Belshazzar rewarded Daniel as he had promised, even though Daniel's interpretation announced the doom of the empire. So it's like, oh, thank you. I don't know, I'm gonna be third ruler for like an hour maybe, I don't know. But he became the third ruler. Belshazzar followed through. I was thinking, like, why would he do that instead of humbling himself? But I think maybe he thought, maybe this will appease Daniel's God if I do this. I don't know. And so they really put trust in their fortification, which I have a picture I'm going to show you in a minute. But I think he probably was just so blinded by arrogance, and they really, really thought that Babylon, the city of Babylon, was impenetrable. And he doesn't know that this traitor, Gabirus, who was like a chief general in his army, had defected, and that at the moment he had told the Medes how to get into how to break into it. And that was happening as the whole handwriting on the wall and stuff is going on. This is what's going on outside the building, the town and the building. So here is, can you guys see that? I'll try to enlarge them. Let me see if I can enlarge them. So here is a map with the city of Babylon, and you can see the Euphrates runs right through the center of it. And if you even look on this outside rim, like it's just fortified. Like it looks small, but those walls are really, really tall, and they're double. I didn't put the dimensions on again, but they're like, I don't know, like a quarter mile or bigger wide. Like that's the size of those, just between one wall and another. And it was just a fortified gate. And so you see over here, can you see that, my little hand? Okay, so you see that like little bridge, and they had water that was diverted into the city. So they had like underground waterways. And so what was happening was these Medes were damming up the Euphrates. They were damming it up, and some think they dammed it so it went into a pool of water or just diverted itself. But however they dammed it up so that this water became dry enough in here to enter, kind of drain those waterways that were running underneath the city to enter. And so we'll see a picture, but I just wanted to show you guys this too. You see, let's see if I can shrink this a little bit. I put this one in so you can kind of see, they might have been in this might be where the hall was having, or over here somewhere. But you can see all these temples. These are all false god temples that are going on in this, just this little town of Babylon, or city of Babylon. And so it just kind of shows the fortified wall. So this is where their trust was, in these walls. Their army was around and encamped out and stuff. But so was the Medes and the Persians' army. And so this is what's happening at this time. And so you can see here they are, where they've drained this Euphrates that ran right through. Look again. See, it's running right through their city. And let me go back. And here they are. So it shows them entering up here, but I'm pretty sure they went through underground waterways and entered into. And there's the Ishtar Gate, and there's the Temple of Marduk. Okay. Daniel 4:30. So that same night, Belshazzar, well, let's just read it in our Bibles first. So that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. And that is actually prophesied. So that same night, Belshazzar the Chaldean king was slain. That very night was as Daniel was receiving his promotion, the Persian army was preparing to conquer the city and execute King Belshazzar. And so I read something about it, and I don't know where they get this in history, but they say like when they entered, he had his sword drawn, and that's why they killed him. So I don't know if that's true or not, but for whatever reason they killed him. But they did not kill his father, so that's kind of an interesting thing. His father, did I tell you about his father already when they took Nabonidus? So they took Nabonidus, and he was not allowed to go back into Babylon, but they set him up in like a Syrian, or would it be a Persian now, city. I can't think of the name of it, but I'll try to get it for next time. And he was allowed to live out his life in peace and quiet with his family. But his son Belshazzar, for whatever reason, they killed him. So Daniel 5:30 says, that same night, oh yeah, we read that, 5:31. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. The fall of Babylon meant the rise of Medo-Persia. The arms and chest of silver from Daniel 2:32, the head of gold, the most valuable part of the statue, did not last very long. So let's go back to Isaiah, and we're going to look at some stuff there. So just back a couple of books. Isaiah chapter 13. And we'll look at verses 17 through 19, and then verse 21. It says, behold, I will stir up the Medes. And remember, Isaiah is like 100 years prior, at least. So behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, who will not regard silver. And as for gold, they will not delight in it. Also their bows will dash the young men to pieces, and they will have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eye will not spare children. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. And then go down to 21. It says, but wild beasts of the desert will lie there, and their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches will dwell there, and wild goats will caper there. And I don't know why I put the goat one, but maybe because in the dream there he's referred to as the goat. I don't know. So we see that's prophesied that the Medes are coming, and we'll get a little bit into the history of that next time we get together. Okay, G, considerations from Daniel 5. 1, God is sovereign, and that's what we need to get in our thinking. God is sovereign. He is the most high above all. So he is the one who raises up and brings down governments. God is able to bring down even the strongest ruler. And let's take a look at these verses. Psalm 29:10. Psalm 29:10. And then we'll go to Psalm 33 after. So I'll give you guys a minute to get there. The Lord sat enthroned at the flood, and the Lord sits as king forever. And then go ahead to Psalm 33. And these are great verses to get in our thinking, especially with what's going on in our culture and really worldwide now. Okay, 33:16, 17. No king is saved by the multitude of an army. A mighty man is not delivered by great strength. A horse is a vain hope for safety, neither shall it deliver any by its great strength. Right? And that's why God wouldn't allow them to have horses in Israel, because he wanted them to trust in him. And that's like us trying to put our faith in the government or policy or our army or military, any of that. Like that's not what's going to save us. It's God. It's God is what's going to save us. And that's where we need to put our hope. Like, Lord, we want your will to be done. And we want to rest in you, knowing that you raise up nations and you tear them down, and you're in control. Okay, so Isaiah 40, verse 15. Behold, I love this verse. Behold, the nations are as a drop in a bucket, and are counted as a small dust on the scales. Look, he lifts up the isles as a very little thing. And that's who our God is. All right, now go ahead to Jeremiah Just going to go one more book, Jeremiah 10, verse 10. But the Lord is the true God. He is the living God and the everlasting King. At his wrath, the earth will tremble, and the nations will not be able to endure his indignation. Right? Just like Belshazzar, he had been judged. The judgment was a fact, and that was coming, whether he humbled himself or not. But he could not stand up to God. Okay, Romans 13:1, which we already read, but we'll do it again. All right, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. And just like he used evil Babylon to take over evil Israel, right? As a nation, they were evil. They were rebelling against God. God allowed an even more evil nation. And that's what, as we go through the book of Habakkuk with Pastor Larry, that's what we're going to see. Habakkuk's trying to figure out, like, really, this evil people you're going to let come take us over? Like, they're way worse than we are, and you're going to let them? And God had a plan, though, didn't he? He knew Nebuchadnezzar. And it did result in Israel never going back to worshiping false idols again, which is very interesting, you know? That's what it took, and God knew that. Okay, 2. When the wicked are in power, take refuge in God. He will take care of you just like he took care of Daniel and his Hebrew friends. So let's go back to the book of Psalm. And we'll go to chapter 7 this time. And we'll read verse 1 in verse 7, chapter 7. And that's what we always want to balance, knowing God is in control, knowing that he allows bad things to happen. But we want to balance that with, "O Lord, my God, in you I put my trust. Save me from all those who persecute me and deliver me." And that's us just putting our trust in God as we watch things implode around us and go from worse to worse to worse. We just keep our eyes on the Lord and put our trust in him. Okay, 11:1 through 7, it says, "In the Lord I put my trust. How can you say to my soul," right? And your soul is like that. It's who you are and you're thinking, "Flee as a bird to your mountain. For look, the wicked bend their bow. They make ready their arrow on the string that they may shoot secretly at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids test the sons of men. The Lord tests the righteous, but the wicked and the one who loves violence, his soul hates. Upon the wicked he will rain coals, fire and brimstone. A burning wind shall be the portion of their cup. For the Lord is righteous. He loves righteousness. His countenance beholds the upright." And God has given us all these accounts in the scripture, even of Sodom and Gomorrah, to show us that he is righteous and his justice will go forth in his timing. And we just need to keep our eyes on him. Okay, and then 56:3. And this is a good, easy one. You can teach this one to your children and your grandchildren. It says, "Whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you." And that's just such a simple thing, but such a hard thing. 3, pride is a dangerous enemy. Let's go to, hold your hand in Proverbs. Let's go to Isaiah 2 and look at verse 12. Okay, it says, "For the day of the Lord of hosts shall come upon everything proud and lofty, upon everything lifted up, and it shall be brought low." And that's a promise to us. That's an encouraging thing to think about. And then back to, I'm sorry, I said hold there, but Proverbs 16. Verse 18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." And that's what we saw with the king. All right, it is often easy to recognize pride in a nation, a leader, a friend, or a family member, but to see pride in yourself is often the most difficult. So Proverbs, you're in Proverbs 16. Let's look at verse, no, they reversed that. That should be 18. So we already read that one. Let's look at John, the book of John, chapters 8. 8, and we'll look at 7 through 11. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, "He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first." And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Then those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. And when Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, "Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you?" And she said, "No, Lord." And Jesus said to her, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." Right? That's a great lesson. Okay, it's 1 Corinthians 8. We got to book it now. We have like 1 minute and 2 slides left. All right, 1 Corinthians 8, 2. "And if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing, yet has as he ought to know." Right? So be careful. Evaluate yourselves, check yourselves, right? I love Psalm 139, where it says, know me and show me any sinful way in me. Okay, 10:12 says, "Therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall." So God is not impressed with man's wealth, wisdom, talents, security, or fame. He is looking for people who will trust him unquestionably. So let's go forward to Philippians chapter 3. And we'll look at verse 7. "But what things were gain to me, these I have counted lost for Christ." And this is Paul who's speaking. And Paul, if anybody had a right to brag, was Paul. And he says, these things are nothing compared to who God is. And then go forward to Hebrews chapter 3. And let's look at verse 19. "So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief." And that's what unbelief is. It's a form of pride. Right? When God tells us something and we think we know it better, or we choose to ignore it and not believe it, that's pride. And then go forth to 11:6, the hall of faith. "But without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him." Right? That puts the responsibility of us. And faith is belief. Without believing what God has told us, it's impossible to please him. And that's all God asks us to do. We don't have to create anything or make up anything or accomplish anything. We just have to believe what he's told us. All right, you should not trust in a job, a political party, connections, houses, or lands, or money. Your trust must be in the Lord alone. And what does Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 say? Trust in the Lord with all your heart and all. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. And we read Jeremiah 17, didn't we? Let me go back to Jeremiah 17:5 and see what that says. Right, that's, well, let's just read that again, because I'm going to read down to the positive part. So it says, "Thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his strength, whose heart departs from the Lord. For he shall be like a shrub in the desert, and shall not see when good comes, but shall inhabit the parched places in the wilderness, in a salt land which is not inhabited." But 7, Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord and whose hope is in the Lord. For he shall be like a tree planted by the waters, which spreads out its roots by the river and will not fear when heat comes. But its leaf will be green and will not be anxious in the year of drought, nor will cease from yielding fruit. The heart is deceitful above all and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Well, God can, right? I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind, even to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doing. And then let's look at one more, James. James chapter 4. 13 through 16. It says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this and that. But now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil." And then the combined court of Belshazzar's wise men had no answers. Human wisdom is foolishness to God. And let's look at 1 Corinthians. Chapter 1. 1 Corinthians 1:20. And it says, "Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world?" And then forward to 3:19 it says, "For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, he catches the wise in their own craftiness." And isn't that the truth? Okay. And then I have this, but we can look at that again later. Okay, let's go ahead and pray. We'll close out our time.